It was a quiet afternoon in Los Angeles. Steven Seagal, dressed in a plain black jacket and sunglasses, walked through a busy market street unnoticed by most. No cameras, no movie sets, just a man enjoying a peaceful day among ordinary people. But not everyone saw him that way. A group of young men standing near a food truck spotted him and smirked. To them, he looked like an aging stranger they could make fun of. One of them shouted, "Hey, old man, you lost?" The others laughed loudly, drawing attention. Steven didn't flinch. He kept walking, his posture calm, his eyes focused ahead. The bullies didn't like that. They moved closer, forming a loose circle around him. One leaned in with arrogance. "You think you're tough, huh? Look at me when I talk to you." Still, Steven said nothing. His silence only fueled their frustration. People nearby began to pause, sensing something was off. The laughter grew sharper, meaner. One bully tried to snatch the sunglasses off Steven's face. That's when his hand froze mid-air. Steven's gaze lifted slowly, sharp and steady like steel behind glass. That single look made the air feel heavier. The crowd grew quiet. Something in his eyes told them he was not the man they thought he was. A woman whispered, "He looks familiar." But before anyone could place him, one of the bullies pushed forward again, trying to provoke a reaction. Steven simply stepped aside, letting the shove miss completely. Not a word, not a blink, just calm, measured control. That's when a strange energy filled the space. The crowd could feel it, and something powerful hiding under that quiet face. And just before the bullies could make their next move, one line of narration would seal the suspense. What Steven did next made every single person there go silent. The tension in the air thickened like fog. Steven stood silently in the center of the street, his calmness almost eerie. Around him, the crowd began to form. Shopkeepers, passers-by, a few people holding up their phones. The bullies, sensing attention, grew bolder. They wanted a show. One of them stepped forward, puffing his chest. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue?" Another laughed, circling behind him. "Hey, maybe he's one of those meditation dudes. Let's test how peaceful he really is." Their laughter echoed down the street, careless and cruel. Steven's head tilted slightly, just enough to show he was listening. But he didn't speak. He didn't move. The only thing alive about him were his eyes, calm, focused, unshaken. His stillness made the bullies even angrier. One of them reached out and shoved his shoulder hard. Steven didn't even step back. He stood like a mountain, steady and unmoved. The crowd murmured. Something about the way he didn't react felt dangerous. Like watching lightning before it strikes. "Hey man, you deaf or what?" The leader barked, stepping closer. "We're talking to you." Still no response. Steven adjusted the sleeve of his jacket slowly, then glanced at the man's reflection in a nearby car window. That small, deliberate motion, quiet, controlled, somehow louder than words. People began whispering. Why's he not fighting back? Maybe he's scared. No, look at his face. That's not fear. The bullies didn't care. They were enjoying the attention. One kicked at Steven's foot. Another laughed, shoving him again. The phones kept recording. The internet's favorite kind of drama unfolding live. Have you ever seen someone underestimate the wrong person? Tell me where you're watching this from. Your city, your country. Because this moment right here, you'll want the world to see it. Steven finally looked up. His voice was low, calm, steady as stone. You boys really don't want to do this. It wasn't loud, but it carried. Every syllable landed like a warning. The leader sneered, trying to laugh it off. Or what, you gonna meditate us to death? Steven's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but precision. The way a hawk locks onto a target. He took one slow step forward, closing the space between them. The bullies instinctively stepped back, though they tried not to show it. Something in his energy shifted, and invisible but undeniable. One bully muttered, "Dude, something's off about this guy." The leader scoffed, "Shut up, he's just old." But Steven's silence was heavier than any insult. He wasn't there to prove a point. He was there to maintain peace, and until peace was no longer an option, then came the push. Harder this time. The bully's palm hit Steven's chest with full force. The impact should have moved him, but Steven didn't even sway. The bully blinked, confused. Steven finally spoke again, quiet but cutting through the noise. "You done?" The bully's smirk faded. "What'd you say?" "I asked," Steven said, voice even lower. "Are you done?" It wasn't a question, it was a boundary. A final warning. The crowd went still. The phones kept filming. Somewhere in the back, a woman whispered, "He's not scared. He's waiting." The leader laughed again, trying to hide his nerves. "Oh, we're just getting started, tough guy." He motioned for his friend to grab Stephen's arm. The second bully lunged forward. But the moment his hand touched Stephen's jacket, Stephen's body moved in a blur, a single twist of the wrist, a shift of balance, and the bully was suddenly on the ground, staring up in shock. The crowd gasped. It happened so fast no one could understand what they'd just seen. Stephen didn't even look down. He adjusted his sleeve again, calm as ever. "Told you," he said softly. "You don't want this." The leader took a step back, anger flashing into confusion. "What the hell was that?" Stephen didn't answer. His silence was his power. The crowd knew something big was about to happen. They could feel it. The air, the energy, the inevitable. The bullies, now half angry, half scared, circled him again, trying to regain control of the moment. But they were already losing it. Every second, Stephen's stillness exposed their weakness. From across the street, someone whispered, "Wait, isn't that Steven Seagal?" The name floated through the air like wildfire, but the bullies hadn't heard it yet. They were too busy trying to hide their fear behind forced laughter. And as the camera phone zoomed in, capturing every detail, the glare of sunlight on Stephen's glasses, the calm in his eyes, the twitch of a nervous bully's hand, the world was seconds away from witnessing a lesson they'd never forget. The moment they found out who they were really dealing with would change everything. The bully on the ground groaned, holding his wrist, still stunned by how quickly Stephen had flipped him without even seeming to move. The crowd was whispering now, phones raised, eyes wide. Stephen didn't gloat, didn't even look at the man he'd just disarmed. He simply took a slow breath, his expression calm, almost serene, like someone meditating in the middle of chaos. The leader of the bullies, taller, younger, desperate not to look weak, barked, "Get up, man." He just got lucky. His voice cracked under pressure. The other bullies hesitated. Deep down, they knew something was off. The way Stephen had moved, precise, smooth, effortless, wasn't luck. It was control. Years of discipline hiding behind silence. Still, pride is louder than reason. The leader stepped closer, forcing a smirk. "You think you can humiliate us and walk away?" He jabbed a finger toward Stephen's chest. "You've got one chance to apologize, old man." Stephen's eyes didn't waver. "Apologize?" His tone was soft, even polite. "For what?" "For touching my friend." The leader snapped, his voice shaky but aggressive. Stephen tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady. "He touched me first." The words hit harder than a punch. The leader's friends snickered awkwardly, trying to hold on to their courage. Stephen took one step closer, and that single step felt like a wall closing in. The air got heavier. The tension, thick. The bully clenched his fists, trying to mask his unease. "I don't care who you think you are," he growled. "I'm not scared of you." Stephen leaned in just enough for the man to feel his breath. "Maybe you should be." That line wasn't shouted. It was whispered, the kind of whisper that cuts deeper than a scream. The crowd gasped. The leader stepped back instinctively, glancing around, realizing everyone was watching. Cameras were out, people were murmuring. This wasn't going his way anymore. Still, he couldn't back down. Not in front of his crew. Not in front of the world. Pride chained him tighter than fear ever could. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth. "You want to play tough guy? Let's see what you've got." The crowd began to stir. Some shouted warnings, others whispered bets. A few people urged Stephen to walk away, but he didn't move. His stillness was more intimidating than any fighting stance. "If someone disrespected you like this, what would you do? Would you walk away or stand your ground? Tell me in the comments. I'm curious what kind of person you'd be in this moment." The bully lunged forward, fast, reckless. Stephen's hand rose slightly, not in anger but precision. In one fluid motion, he sidestepped, gripped the attacker's arm, and turned. The bully's momentum flipped against him. In less than a heartbeat, he was face down on the pavement, his own force used against him. Gasps filled the air. The other bullies froze. Stephen stepped back calmly, his hands loose at his sides, not even out of breath. He looked at the crowd, not arrogantly, but as if checking to make sure no one was hurt. Then softly he said, "Violence doesn't prove strength. Control does." The leader scrambled up, red-faced and shaking with embarrassment. His voice broke as he shouted, "He's a freak! Who even is this guy?" Someone from the crowd yelled, That's Steven Seagal, man. The movie star. The martial artist. The name spread like wildfire. The bullies' faces went pale. They looked at each other, realization dawning in slow horror. The man they'd mocked wasn't just some old stranger. He was a black belt, a martial arts legend who'd trained with masters before they were even born. The crowd started clapping, not mockingly, but with admiration. Some cheered. Others just stared, trying to process what they'd witnessed. The leader's friends began backing away, muttering apologies. But pride still burned in their leader's eyes. He couldn't handle the humiliation, not in front of hundreds of people, not with cameras recording every second. He spat on the ground and hissed, "You think you're some kind of hero? This isn't a movie, old man." Steven turned slightly, meeting his eyes with quiet intensity. "No," he said. "This is real life. And in real life, respect matters more than ego." That line hit hard. The crowd went silent again. The leader's breathing grew shaky. Every ounce of false courage drained from his face. Steven adjusted his jacket, gave a small nod to the crowd, and said, "You should go home." The bullies didn't move. They just stared at him, humiliated, powerless, confused. The tension hung in the air like a storm that hadn't quite passed. Steven began walking away slowly, every step deliberate, graceful. Behind him, whispers rippled through the crowd, awe, relief, admiration. But this story wasn't over. Not yet, because one of the bullies, his pride wounded and anger boiling, muttered under his breath, "He got lucky," and that whisper was about to turn into something far more dangerous. What happened next would push Steven's patience to its very limit and show the world the difference between power and control. The street was quiet now, except for the low hum of phones recording and the sound of nervous breathing. Steven Seagal stood in the middle of the crowd, motionless, calm, the picture of discipline. But behind him, the bullies weren't done. The leader, still burning with embarrassment, clenched his fist so tight his knuckles turned white. His friends whispered, "Let it go, man. He'll destroy you." But pride, that old poisonous voice, one wouldn't let him stop. He spat on the ground again. "Nah, nobody makes a fool out of me." The crowd murmured, uneasy. They knew this was about to go very wrong. Steven paused mid-step, sensing the tension behind him. He turned his head slightly, eyes half hidden by his glasses. "Don't," he said quietly. That one word, calm but commanding, carried across the entire street. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. The kind that comes from someone who's seen enough fights to know how they end. But the bullies didn't listen. The leader charged forward, yelling, "You think you can walk away from me?" Time seemed to slow. The moment he reached Steven, a blur of movement followed. A single twist of the wrist, a shift of weight, and the bully's arm was caught mid-swing. Before anyone could blink, Steven turned his body slightly, redirecting the force, and the man flew sideways, crashing onto the pavement with a dull thud. The crowd gasped in perfect unison. Steven hadn't even broken a sweat. His breathing was steady, his hands already relaxed by his sides again. The second bully panicked and rushed forward, fists swinging wild. Steven leaned aside effortlessly, catching the man's arm, pivoting and sending him rolling onto his back with nothing but balance and precision. 2 moves. 2 men down, both disarmed without a single punch thrown. Someone in the crowd whispered, "That's Aikido. That's martial arts." Another voice added, "He didn't even hit them." Steven looked down at the fallen bullies, his voice quiet but heavy with authority. "I told you, walk away while you can." The third man, trembling but trying to act tough, picked up a broken piece of wood from near the sidewalk. "You think we're scared of your movie tricks?" he barked. Steven's gaze locked onto him, calm, patient, but deadly serious. "Son," he said, "this isn't a movie." The man swung the wooden piece toward Steven's head, fast and desperate. But before the swing connected, Steven stepped in, his hand catching the attacker's wrist midair. A single turn of his body redirected the motion, sending the weapon flying harmlessly to the ground. Then with one simple motion, he guided the bully off balance and let him fall backward with a thud that silenced the entire street. Gasps erupted. Some people cheered. Others stood frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. Steven didn't smile. He didn't even look proud. He simply straightened his jacket, scanned the crowd, and said, "You don't win by hurting people. You win by understanding when to stop." The leader groaned on the ground, glaring up with anger and humiliation. You think you're better than us? Stephen looked down at him, calm but firm. No, just smarter. That single line hit harder than any strike. The crowd erupted in whispers. Phones flashed, capturing every angle of the moment. The bullies who had started the day laughing were now sprawled on the ground, their pride shattered and their arrogance exposed. One by one, they began to stand, shaky and ashamed. None of them dared to look Stephen in the eyes. Stephen turned his head slightly, scanning the faces around him, the crowd, the phones, the fear. His tone softened. Don't ever mistake silence for weakness, he said. The strongest people are the ones who know when to walk away. The leader swallowed hard, his voice trembling. Who are you? Stephen didn't answer. He simply looked at him, then turned away. Someone from the back shouted, That's Steven Seagal. The name spread like fire. Murmurs turned to shouts, gasps, cheers. It is him. The martial arts legend. He's a black belt. The bullies' faces turned pale. The leader's knees almost buckled. He couldn't believe who he had been taunting. The man who'd trained with real masters. The Hollywood icon known for his speed, precision, and calm control. Stephen finally stopped and looked over his shoulder, his voice carrying the weight of both wisdom and warning. Respect isn't about fear, he said quietly. It's about understanding your place in the world, and not mistaking kindness for weakness. He gave a slight nod, then began walking away as the crowd erupted in applause. The bullies stood frozen, too humiliated to speak. The cameras kept rolling, every clip destined to go viral within hours. But for Stephen, it wasn't about fame or views. It was about the lesson. One every person there would remember for life. The moment was over. But what came next would humble the bullies in a way they never expected. The street was alive with whispers, cameras flashing and adrenaline pumping through the air. The bullies who once laughed now stood frozen, their confidence shattered. The name Steven Seagal echoed through the crowd like thunder. Everyone suddenly realized who they had been mocking. Not just an ordinary man, but a martial arts icon, a real black belt who trained for decades in Aikido, karate and judo. Stephen stood in the center, still as stone, his expression calm but intense. He adjusted his sunglasses and looked at the bullies who could barely meet his gaze. You boys ever hear of control? He asked, his tone quiet, but it carried across the street like a whisper that demanded attention. One of the bullies stammered, We were just... Stephen raised a hand slightly, stopping him mid-sentence. You were disrespecting, and now you're embarrassed. That's how life works. You give out disrespect when it comes back harder than you expect. The crowd listened, completely silent. The same people who were recording now lowered their phones, realizing they were watching more than a street fight. They were witnessing a moment of truth. Stephen slowly stepped toward the group, his boots echoing on the pavement. You look at someone and you think you know them because of what they wear, how old they are, how quiet they seem. He paused, letting his words cut through the air. That's weakness and not strength. The leader swallowed hard, his voice shaking. We didn't mean to, Stephen interrupted again, his voice firmer now. But you did. And it's not the first time you've done something like this, is it? You've probably scared people who couldn't defend themselves. You thought that made you powerful. But power isn't about making others small. It's about knowing you could hurt someone, and choosing not to. There was no anger in his tone, only truth. That made it hit even harder. The youngest bully looked down, ashamed. Stephen saw that and softened slightly. Look, he said, I don't hate you. You're young, dumb, full of pride. I was like that once. But I learned, the hard way, that pride will get you hurt faster than any punch. He looked at the crowd now, raising his voice just enough for everyone to hear. Listen, all of you. Every single person watching this, never judge someone by how they look. You never know what kind of strength or story they carry. The audience nodded, many whispering in agreement. Some even clapped quietly. Stephen looked back at the bullies, his eyes steady. If you really want to be strong, learn discipline. Learn respect. Get in a dojo, train, fall 1,000 times. Then maybe you'll understand what power actually feels like. The leader, still shaken, finally muttered, I'm sorry, man. Stephen tilted his head slightly. Don't tell me, he said. Tell the people you've hurt before. Make it mean something. There was a pause, a long, uncomfortable silence that felt like time itself had stopped. Then one by one, the bullies nodded. The apology wasn't loud, but it was real. Stephen took a slow breath, then turned his back on them. Not in arrogance, but in peace. That's what made it powerful. He wasn't looking for revenge. He had already won, not by fighting, but by teaching. The crowd erupted into applause. Some people shouted his name, others filmed with tears in their eyes. The tension that once filled the air had transformed into admiration and respect. A bystander yelled, "You're a legend, Stephen." He smiled faintly and shook his head. "No," he said softly. "I'm just a man who's seen too many fights. And I know, the strongest man is the one who walks away." He began to leave, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. The bullies stood quietly watching him go, no longer angry but humbled. The leader, still holding his sore wrist, looked down at his hands. "We messed with the wrong guy," he whispered. His friend replied, "Nah, we messed with the right one. We just didn't know it." As Stephen disappeared around the corner, the crowd began to talk again, their voices filled with awe. Clips of the moment were already flooding social media. But more than the fight, it was his words, his lesson, that people were sharing. Never mistake silence for weakness. Respect over ego. Strength without control is just chaos. Those phrases echoed online, spreading like wildfire. In minutes, millions of viewers would see Stephen's calm composure and hear his message, one that transcended the fight itself. And as the camera faded out, the narration set the stage for the next twist. The story should have ended there. But what happened later that night would change everything for the bullies, and prove that respect always finds its way back. By nightfall, the video had already taken over the internet. Clips of Steven Seagal's calm defiance and effortless moves were everywhere. TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. The caption read, "Bullies mess with old man, regret it when they learn who he is." Within hours, it hit millions of views. Hashtags trended worldwide. Comments poured in, from fans, fighters, and even police officers, all praising Seagal's restraint and wisdom. "Imagine being that calm while surrounded by punks," one user wrote. Another said, "That's not just martial arts, that's self-control." By morning, the video had reached news outlets. Reporters debated the deeper message: power, respect, and humility. Stephen's quiet lesson had struck a nerve across generations. But while the world celebrated him, the bullies were dealing with something else entirely. Shame. The leader, whose name was Ryan, hadn't slept all night. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends, classmates, even relatives, and all had seen the video. Memes were spreading. He had become the internet's newest villain. At first, Ryan tried to deny it. But seeing his own face on the screen, watching himself mock a stranger who turned out to be a legend, it crushed him. His friends, the same ones who once hyped him up, now avoided him. He felt exposed, humiliated, and guilty in a way he'd never felt before. Meanwhile, Stephen was back at his home on the outskirts of Los Angeles, quiet, peaceful, far from the chaos of social media. He sipped green tea as he watched the news quietly playing the clip again and again. But he didn't smile. He wasn't proud of the fame. He was reflecting. He turned to his assistant and said softly, "They'll learn something from this, if the world doesn't drown them in hate first." A few days later, something unexpected happened. Ryan showed up at Stephen's dojo, nervous, hesitant, but determined. His clothes were plain, his face pale from sleepless nights. He stood at the entrance, clutching the door frame as if unsure whether he belonged there. Stephen was teaching a small class, demonstrating fluid wrist movements and balance techniques. When he noticed Ryan at the door, he paused. The room went quiet. Ryan took a deep breath. "Sir, I'm sorry," he said, voice trembling, "for what I did, for what I said. I didn't know who you were, but that doesn't matter. I disrespected you, and it's been eating me alive ever since." Stephen studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slightly. "You came here," he said. "That's already more courage than you showed that day." Ryan lowered his head. I don't want to be that guy anymore." Stephen gestured for him to step inside. The students moved aside as Ryan entered the dojo, feeling the heavy silence of discipline and history. The air smelled faintly of tatami mats and respect. Stephen walked over, his movement slow, deliberate. "You want to learn?" he asked. Ryan hesitated. "Yes, sir, I do. I want to understand what real strength feels like." Stephen nodded once. Then start by bowing, not to me, but to the lesson. Ryan bowed deeply, his head low, his ego finally quiet. The sound of his breath trembled in the stillness. For the next few minutes, Stephen guided him through simple stances. Breathing, balance, awareness. No punches, no kicks, just calm control. As the class ended, Stephen looked him in the eyes and said, "You've got a lot to unlearn, Ryan. Strength isn't about who you can hurt. It's about who you can protect, including yourself from your own pride." Ryan nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not humiliating me more." Stephen placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You already did that yourself. Now build from it." That moment, captured by no cameras, was the real ending, the one no one online would see. Later that day, Stephen received an email. It was from Ryan. It read, "You changed me, sir. I joined your class today not to prove anything, but to learn. I want to be someone I can respect when I look in the mirror." Stephen smiled softly as he read it. Then he closed the laptop and whispered to himself, "Lesson complete." A few days later, when Stephen was asked by a reporter about the viral video, he gave a quiet smile and said, "People think it was about fighting. It wasn't. It was about teaching, and the only fight worth winning is the one against ignorance." The clip of that interview went viral too. This time, not for the fight, but for the wisdom behind it. If you've ever been judged unfairly, or if you've learned a lesson the hard way, type "respect" in the comments. And tell me what city or country you're watching from. As the camera faded out, the story's narrator concluded in a deep cinematic tone. Steven Seagal didn't just win a fight that day, he changed a life. Because real warriors don't destroy, they rebuild. The story of that day didn't fade away, it evolved. Weeks later, clips of Steven Seagal's calm defiance were still circulating, but now the focus had shifted. It wasn't about the fight anymore, it was about the lesson. Every quote he said, "Never mistake silence for weakness and power means choosing not to hurt," became viral captions, tattooed into comments, reposted in motivational videos, and echoed across podcasts and news panels. Steven Seagal had accidentally started a global conversation about respect. People from all walks of life, martial artists, parents, students, even soldiers, began sharing their own stories under hashtags like "respect over ego" and "the Seagal lesson." They talked about the times they were judged, mocked, or underestimated, and how they chose peace instead of revenge. Meanwhile, Ryan, the leader of the Bullies, kept his promise. He continued attending Steven's dojo every week. At first, he could barely make it through a warm-up without losing focus. But slowly, something changed. His posture improved. His breathing steadied. The anger that once burned in his chest began to fade. One evening, Stephen approached him after class. "You're learning control," he said. Ryan smiled softly. "I'm learning respect, sir. The kind I never gave." The dojo had become more than a training place, and it was a sanctuary. Stephen didn't treat Ryan like an enemy or a fan. He treated him like a student, one who had finally found balance. Outside, the media continued to chase the story. Reporters wanted drama, fame, or controversy. But Stephen kept his distance. He refused interviews that glorified violence. When he finally agreed to one last appearance, his words were simple. "Everyone's strong when they're angry. But true strength is when you're calm, when you can look at someone trying to hurt you and still choose peace." That quote went viral again, touching millions. Teachers played it in classrooms. Martial arts schools printed it on their walls. Stephen's once ordinary day had become a global lesson. A few months later, Ryan returned to that same Market Street, the place where it all began. This time, he wasn't with friends, wasn't acting tough. He stood there quietly, watching the people go by. He smiled as he saw a young man being teased by a group, and before it could go too far, Ryan stepped in, not with violence, but with words. "Hey," he said firmly, "you don't need to do that to feel strong." The group backed off, surprised by his calm. The boy he defended thanked him with wide eyes. For the first time, Ryan felt what real power was, not in domination, but in doing what's right. Later that night, he sent Stephen a short message. "You were right, sir. The real fight was inside me." Stephen read it, smiled faintly, and said to himself, "Good. That's how warriors are made." Back online, millions still watch the original video, But now the comments had shifted tone. No one cared about who won or lost. They cared about the message. People began tagging their friends, writing, "This is what real strength looks like." In the end, Steven Seagal didn't just silence a group of bullies. He silenced the world's obsession with meaningless aggression. He showed that even in a world full of noise, humility still speaks the loudest. And as the camera fades into a slow-motion replay of Steven walking away that day, jacket swaying, sunglasses reflecting the sunset, the narrator's voice closes the story with one powerful truth. Legends aren't made in the spotlight. They're made in moments of silence, when a man chooses wisdom over war. If you believe real strength lies in calmness, type respect in the comments and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Because every act of peace creates a ripple, and maybe, just maybe, that ripple starts with you.